Hey everybody, can everyone hear me okay? Can you see my slides? Awesome. So I'm going to talk to you tonight about something near and dear to my heart, testing in JavaScript. We're going to cover a little about unit tests, TDD, BDD, and I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So hopefully you'll all learn something. Quick about me. My name is Sara Raasch. I am Sara Raasch on Twitter and Sara forward and backwards on GitHub. I am senior front-end developer at Purebred Breeders, and if you are looking for an adorable purebred puppy, we can help you find one. I'm also really into knitting and comic books. A little backstory. I worked at an ad agency for 6 years. It was my first job out of school. I launched somewhere around 100 websites in that time frame across 20 different advertising campaigns. And I thought testing meant making sure a site worked in Internet Explorer. Or Outlook. So I left the ad agency, and I really loved to learn testing. And there are 3 apps that I worked on that really brought me around to why testing is great and why we should all be doing it. So, I got a new job. Hooray! I was working on a product, no longer working for clients, which meant I got to work on one thing repeatedly, day after day. But the thing I started working on was a legacy app. It had 0 tests. It also had 0 infrastructure to run tests. It was jQuery tightly coupled to the DOM, so if you tried to run the scripts standalone, they sort of all exploded. There were no front-end build tools. It was a .NET MVC project behind the scenes. So I started working on this. The devs who had initially worked on the project had all left the company. There was no one there to tell me how to work on anything. So spoiler alert, I broke production. It was bad. I cried. So I decided to fix this. Within the first 6 months at that company, one of the key things I really wanted to do was add modern build tools and get testing involved in this app. So I added in Grunt, which was really easy to integrate into the legacy framework. I installed a Grunt plugin called Contrib QUnit, which runs QUnit unit testing. I added in Phantom JS headless browser integrations so that I could run all my tests through the command line. And then I was able to write some unit tests, and it was very exciting. So here's my super simple demo. I've got a really basic grunt file and a really basic package JSON to run these NPM packages. It's just using connect to run a local server and QUnit to run the actual QUnit tests. Got a really simple HTML file that basically just has a div that runs the QUnit tests and some slides. In this particular demo, I'm testing Reveal.js, which I wrote my slides in because I couldn't think of anything else to write tests in. And then my test file is really simple. It's just checking that when it loads, it's on the first slide and not on the last slide. So if I run my QUnit tests in my browser, you can see it's very exciting, maybe. Ah. Where did you go? Sorry, I kind of built my demos at a bar last night, so this is A little unexpected. Yeah. All right, so I'm not on the first slide. I'm on the first slide. I'm not on the last slide. My code works. I can ship it to production, and it won't break. Maybe. So, woohoo! I've got unit tests. They're testing individual units of code. Is that what I want? I don't know. I guess having some tests are better than having no tests, right? Maybe I won't break production this week. But then it turns out the actual test, the actual site I was working on made a bunch of authenticated API calls on load, which all required API tokens, which expired. So I couldn't hard code them into my test file, and making a call to get the API token before running the test wasn't a unit test. That's an integration test. How do I do that? Well, I can't actually do anything to fix that code without refactoring the whole app, and that takes a lot of time. How can I work around that and make my tests run now? There's a really great library for that called Sign-In. And Sign-In gives you spies, stubs, and a fake HTTP server. So you can set it up that if I hit any API endpoint I want, it returns the data I want. So I can have it pretend to hit my API and give me back the data I'm expecting, at which point my tests all work again, assuming the API doesn't go down. I'm not going to break production, and everything's happy. So the second app, new shiny app. Should really stop hitting my touchpad. The new shiny app is built in Ember. It's got some tests. It's maybe got 50% test coverage, better than no tests. And we start working on it and we decide, well, what can we do to make this app better now that we've got unit tests? Well, let's start doing test-driven development. Okay, sometimes we'll do test-driven development. All code required reviews, and you couldn't pass a review without tests, but generally we wrote the test after we wrote the code because, well, we're all kind of lazy sometimes. TDD says you should have 3 rules of how to do your tests. You can't write any production code until you have first written a failing test. Then you can't write more of a unit test than is sufficient to fail, and not compiling is failing. And finally, you can't write more production code than is sufficient to pass the currently failing unit test. Or in my paraphrased, write failing test, write code to pass failing test, and no more, repeat. I don't have a demo for TDD. There was a really good talk here back in 2014, I believe, that went nitty-gritty into how to do TDD, and you should all go watch it. All right, so now I've got a new app. It's got good-ish test coverage. Wrote a bunch of unit tests. Things feel stable. But what happens when I run into things I can't write a unit test for? And that happens a lot. That's where integration testing comes in. So integration testing is built into Ember and React and Angular and most large frameworks and libraries. But if not, if you're rolling your own framework or you're in a framework that doesn't support it, Karma, Intern, and Nightwatch are 3 really popular libraries that will do integration testing. And integration testing is going to test how your units or modules work together. An example of a more advanced sort of acceptance integration test would be like visit a page, enter some data, click a button, and see that the data is correct. And I have a demo for this guy. Sorry, all my demos are in Ember because that's what I write. So this is still using QUnit and QUnit's assertion library. So it's basically just importing the module I want to test and testing that it renders and testing that the text on the page renders correctly and that it hides if I click a button. So here's my really great app. You can see my great fancy text component. It makes text look fancy. And I have a button that is not part of that component that toggles that text. It's pretty much the best website I've built this week, and I'm really proud of it. So the test I wrote basically makes sure that that guy renders, and that if you pass in the class that makes it hides correctly. So Ember's test setup, which is great, automatically runs JS hint on all my stuff so I don't write badly coded code. And I can filter it by the integration test for my component, and you can see it renders and it hides, and it's very exciting. All right, so my third app is the app I'm actually working on right now, which I'd love to show you, but I can't. This app is totally greenfield. It is an internal tool, so I can support which browsers I want, which means new Chrome and nothing else. I get to do so much TDD because I have a much better time frame and I can settle my own rules. I've got 100% test coverage of all 3 of my JavaScript files right now. It's beautiful. And I get to use the latest everything and pick all the tools. So I wrote it in Ember because it makes me happy. So I've got this great new app. It's wonderful. How can I make my tests even better? Enter behavioral-driven development. So the assertions in the QUnit testing library are very much, does this equal this? That's how the assertions are written, which as a programmer is easy to understand, but not necessarily a great way to transfer your requirements into what you're testing. So with BDD, I can describe what I want my app to do in more readable language, and it's easier to translate acceptance criteria and requirements into tests. So got another demo app. You'll once again notice my awesome fancy text component, which is still super fancy. I can still toggle my text. But instead of the standard QUnit library and assertions, I replaced it with Mocha. So Mocha is a BDD testing framework that lets you choose your assertion library. So I am using Chai as my assertion library. So instead of in the QUnit traditional unit testy sort of syntax where my asserts were assert equal this equals something else, instead my assertions now look like this. I expect this is spans CSS display to equal none. So when I get requirements from my product people who say, when I click a button, something should hide, I go, okay, I expect the object to be hidden, making it much easier to have my whole test suite align with the rest of the requirements for the project. It also looks cooler. So here is my fancy new Mocha and Chai acceptance tests that are failing. So that's great. So what's next now that I've got all these fancy tests? I tied ESHint into my test task so that if it doesn't lint, my tests automatically fail. I tied my testing task into a Git hook using an NPM task so that if I try to commit with failing tests, my commits don't go through. I added blanket.js to show my test coverage, so that's how I know that my 3 files have 100% test coverage right now. And I tied all of this into a continuous integration environment, so failing tests break the build, and hopefully no bad code ever gets out to production. And I live in a happy world where I don't break production every week, and everything is sunshine and puppy dogs. Questions?
No questions. There we go.
Do you feel like writing tests made working with legacy code a little bit more fun?
It not only made it more fun, it made it less terrifying, because there was no one else at the company who knew what was going on with this code. So I'd be like, oh, you want me to add this feature? Okay, I hope this isn't going to be the time that I take down all 5 web servers, because that would be really bad. It also makes it a lot easier to refactor your code. So once you have a good test coverage, if I want to take that legacy code and scrap it, as long as it still passes all the tests, I know that my code still works like it's supposed to.
Can you show us a blanket JS coverage?
I cannot. And I'm not on the Wi-Fi. It's on an app that's not live yet, so I can't show anything.
I have a question.
Yeah?
So, okay, it's common, especially when you're testing behavior, right, to have multiple scenarios for different types of users. For instance, at Lone Wolf, we have clients, we have designers, and we have admins. And so we will have different behavior on the same view depending on who's there. Sometimes even nested behavior. Like, for instance, if a designer is enabled to see premium projects, they'll see different information. In a test, this can get rather nested, because you'll have the main test for, hey, this page, right, the dashboard page, right? And then you'll have, okay, well, if you're in the context of a designer, and then you'll have 2 sub-contexts where if you're in the context of a premium designer or a non-premium designer, you'll see these things. Do you tend to go heavily nested, or do you tend to put them all in a singular context, like at the top level, where it's like, describe the view and then context, when I'm a designer who is premium enabled, or do you put them in nested? Like, what do you prefer?
I don't nest.
Okay,
The nesting is really hard to maintain, and I want not only my production app code to be clean, I want my test code to be clean, and so I, in general, try to avoid nesting if at all possible. So if I can separate those out and use some sort of a scheme to make it load the context of the user separately, that would be the way I would approach that.
And my second question is, where do you put your test files?
Ooh, outside of my app folder, I have an app folder and then I have a test folder, so that I can publish my app to production without publishing my tests.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, right there.
So you mentioned that you're kind of on your own, so you have complete control over your stack and over your test coverage and everything. Do you think if you were working with somebody else, part of the corporation, you would have the same amount of test coverage you have now, or do you think you'd change things up?
Going from an environment where I had 0 test coverage to minimal test coverage to really good test coverage, it has become vital to my development workflow to have that test coverage. Not only for me personally making sure I don't break production, but I work in a team, and I often work in teams with junior developers, and I want them to have that confidence to make changes and not worry that they're going to break things.
All right, awesome. Everyone give it up for Sara.
What we got before this was a talk in the practical about making sure your stuff works. And I'm going to talk about making things weird. And you want to know your stuff works when you make things weird. So write tests, please. So the talk is titled Use Babel in a Modern Working Environment, but the secret title is Future Tool. Okay, so just follow me a little bit as I talk to you about what I think is like one of the best tools to come out for modern software development in a long time.